Wrestling, when you stop and think about it for half a second, is very strange. The suspension of disbelief required to accept even the most basic of things like an Irish whip is hard to explain, but trying to clarify why a giant redneck undead Undertaker is battling a massive orange hot dog man for a shiny belt whilst gesticulating a lot is even harder. Of all the major wrestling companies, WWE is often the strangest, with Vince McMahon's sports entertainment behemoth utilizing any gimmick imaginable in order to make some sweet dollar. And what may seem perfectly normal in the world of wrestling is absolutely ridiculous when you step out of the sports entertainment bubble. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 weirdest WWE gimmicks of the 1980s. Join us! Number 10, Junkyard Dog. WWE wouldn't truly go off the deep end with gimmicks until the 90s, as in the 80s, Vince was still molding WWE into his image, mainly by taking the most successful performers from the territories and relocating them. One of which was the Junkyard Dog. A huge star in Bill Watts' Mid-South Wrestling, Junkyard Dog was over like Rover, another dog, from the second he stepped through WWE's doors, storming to the ring with a dog collar and chain as Queen's Another One Bites the Dust blared out. Sure, the gimmick originated with Watts, but in WWE it summed up the McMahon ethos of family-friendly, larger-than-life characters as JYD danced with kids and often pretended to be an actual canine. From running around on all fours, headbutting opponents, to having a manic look in his eye like he was itching for a game of fetch, JYD would have seemed absolutely bonkers to a WWE audience who just 1 year prior would have been used to serious performers like Bob Backlund tying people up in knots. Number 9, adorable Adrian Adonis. Wrestling has always had its fair share of ambiguously androgynous characters, from Gorgeous George through Adrian Street to Goldust. It's a trope that's been used over and over again to varying levels of success. In the 80s, the mantle fell to Adrian Adonis, who, after ending his North-South Connection team with Dick Murdoch, decided to adopt an effeminate look, complete with peroxide blonde hair, pink trunks, and a scarf, a million miles away from his former gruff leather jacket sporting biker look. The now adorable one became a heat magnet, battering Roddy Piper with a crutch and antagonizing people on his flower shop interview segment. And because WWE at the time wasn't the most progressive place on earth, they may as well have said, "Boo this man because homophobia," or something. Adonis's run wasn't long and was most memorable for being Brutus Beefcake's first customer after graduating from barber college. Number 8, the Red Rooster. Legend says that Kurt Hennig and Terry Taylor were sat together in WWE when management said, "Hennig, you're Mr. Perfect. Taylor, you're the Red Rooster." And whilst Perfect became one of the biggest stars of the era, Rooster was just kinda there, acting like a barnyard animal. Absorbed into the Heenan family, Rooster was often left staring at the lights, as pretending to be an actual rooster isn't a sound strategy in a wrestling match. He would crow and caw, bobbed his head back and forth, he even had that little red thing on the top of his head. Rumours that he existed solely on a diet of corn and grain have never been confirmed. Again, compared to the weirdness of the 90s and 2000s, the Rooster seems almost mild, but as we would go on to see, the Red Rooster would not be the only wrestling bird in WWE's annals. A wrestling bird? That would never work. Number 7, the Bushwackers. The Sheep Herders were one of the most feared tag teams in all of wrestling. Ultra-violent outback lunatics, their matches were hardcore bloodbaths as Luke Williams and Butch Miller used whatever they could get their hands on to maim their opponents. Obviously, Vince McMahon took one look at the lads, soaked with the red stuff, and thought, "Ha ha ha, comedy head-licking dorks," and the Sheep Herders became the Bushwackers. Another entry in the storied annals of the odd foreigner gimmick, the Bushwackers were primarily known for bouncing to the ring, licking fans, and biting bums. If these tactics were tried today, there would be a bevy of lawsuits, I'm sure. Still, like the majority of the gimmicks on this list, even though the Bushwackers were indeed odd, they were popular and, most importantly, memorable. The Bushwackers somehow got weirder in the 90s when they went to ECW and became Luke and Butch Dudley. Number 6, the Honky Tonk Man. As WWE became more bombastic and larger than life than ever before, it made perfect sense that a wrestling Elvis would turn up. A ridiculous, tone-deaf Elvis who couldn't sing or play the guitar, but Elvis nonetheless. The fact that Honky still has the longest single Intercontinental Championship reign is amazing, but when you actually remember that this was a wrestling Elvis, then it's even more miraculous. I repeat, a wrestling Elvis impersonator was Intercontinental Champion for a record-setting 454 days. You can't fault Vince's booking though. If you were channel hopping and saw what appeared to be the King pile-driving someone, you wouldn't change the channel, would you? Some say that Honky takes his gimmick a little too seriously though. Just ask Eric Bischoff, who gladly fired Honky after a handful of appearances for WCW, with the quiffed quarreler allegedly not wanting to do the job to Johnny B. Bad, who himself was a Little Richard ripoff. Rockin' wrestling indeed. Number 5, George the Animal Steele. He's big, he's wild, he eats turnbuckles, has a green tongue, and carries a weird grey bit of fluff called mine. He is the Animal George Steele. A character with questionable mental capacity, the last place you would expect for him to be employed is a National Combat League. But the Animal rose the ranks to become one of WWE's biggest stars during the 1980s rock and wrestling boom, even challenging Intercontinental Champion Randy Savage at WrestleMania 2 and cornering Ricky Steamboat at Mania 3. Steele had been with WWE for many years before Vince Jr. took over, memorably battling Bruno Sammartino, and what's more, the lumbering madman gimmick had been a staple in wrestling for years. But when viewed in isolation, seeing 50-year-old schlubby, hairy-backed, coloured-tongued George amongst the cocaine, steroid and suntan-happy WWE roster of the day made him stick out like a sore thumb. Number 4, The Ultimate Warrior. An undisputed pop culture icon, The Ultimate Warrior was one of the biggest names in the entire wrestling industry in the late 80s, with his high-intensity, snarling, face-painted mush and neon-soaked attire making him someone that you just could not take your eyes off. But the promos about gods and ghost warriors, the fact that he couldn't spell respect, and the general idea that this lunatic from parts unknown just turned up one day with his mullet and tassels and demanded to fight people, it's all very, very odd when viewed out of context. But hey, it worked, and it worked damn well. It didn't matter that literally nothing about the warrior or his storylines made a lick of sense. From threatening to possess pilots and cause a plane crash, to screaming at snakes, bleeding black ooze, and whatever the hell else you can think of, it was all amazing. Besides the matches, that is. Most of those were rubbish. Number 3, Zeus. Knowing that Vince McMahon favors entertainment over wrestling, the decision was made to have Hulk Hogan star as Rip in the movie No Holds Barred, where he would wrestle the fearsome Zeus. But why stop at just a movie? To fully promote the cinematic marvel, the decision was made to have actor Tiny Lister Jr. learn a few moves and team up with Randy Savage to take on Hogan and Brutus Beefcake at SummerSlam 89, and again at No Holds Barred, the match/the movie in December. The weird thing about Zeus was that WWE acknowledged him as both a character from a movie, but also as an actual wrestler, as kayfabe and reality intertwined, creating a confused mess. Were the events of the film real? Was the WWE fake? It was a lot to swallow. Seeing as Lister was an actor and not a wrestler, he was understandably lousy in the ring. Undeterred though, WCW brought Lister in for the awful Doomsday Cage match in 1996, but dubbed him Z-Gangster instead. He fared no better. Number 2, The Missing Link. In a similar vein to George Steele and Kamala, The Missing Link was a terrifying wild man who was unpredictable and savage in a wrestling ring. But look at him. What the hell is going on there? A huge bloke in tiny black trunks with a green and blue face and Krusty the Clown's hair, Missing Link looked like a child's drawing come to life. Weirdly enough, despite being absolute WWE fodder, the Missing Link gimmick was first trotted out in NWA affiliates Mid-South and WCCW, where the Link feuded with the Freebirds and the Von Erichs. In WWE, the Missing Link's run was brief and saw him become a jobber to the stars such as George Steele and Tito Santana. Just imagine if scientists did discover the Missing Link in human evolution and it turns out our genetic ancestors were jacked dudes with green faces. That is the sort of world I want to live in. Number 1, Akeem the African Dream. Big burly bruiser one-man gang was spinning his wheels and was in need of a refresh. Naturally, manager Slick claimed the white American Carolina native was actually African, and after some African dancers danced around a bin on fire, Akeem the African Dream emerged, talking jive and badly dancing. It was the 80s, so we just accepted this, but in hindsight, what the actual hell was going on? A thinly veiled dig at American Dream Dusty Rhodes, Akeem was fairly successful in WWE, dominating the tag division with Big Boss Man as the Twin Twin Towers. But the gimmick lasted a little over 2 years, with Akeen's loss to Big Boss Man at WrestleMania 6 signaling the beginning of the end of the dream. Reverting back to One Man Gang, Gang ended up in WCW and even upended Kensuke Sasaki for the US title at Starrcade 95 in a dark match. Can you imagine WWE trying to do Akeen today? Honestly, that would be as tone deaf as naming an Austrian wrestler after a Nazi U-boat commander or something. Oh, wait.